Hey guys, just gonna say real quick that I now officially have a Patreon where you can get early video previews, behind the scenes info, and a bunch of other cool stuff for only $2. I'll leave the link in the description if you want to give it a look, but otherwise, enjoy the video. Bye! You know, for a franchise as well known as Silent Hill, it's had a rather tragic history, hasn't it? After Silent Hill Downpour released to mixed reviews in 2012, the series went dormant, reduced to nothing more than a merchandise machine of figures, skateboards, and strange pachinko machines. That is until October 2022, when Konami, after a decade of silence, announced their plans to release 4 brand new Silent Hill games over the coming years, as well as a movie. And while most fans were absolutely ecstatic to finally see one of the most revered and beloved horror franchises back in action, some people naturally had their doubts. Konami aren't exactly famed for treating their game franchises with much respect, especially in the early 2010s. They were cancelling projects, releasing half-baked games, and while the goal of every company is to, earn money, Konami made it quite clear that they were willing to trample on the legacy of legendary franchises like Metal Gear Solid, Castlevania, and, of course, Silent Hill to make a quick buck. So a lot of people's excitement during that fateful October transmission was tinged with apprehension. Once bitten, twice shy and all that. But out of all the titles announced at that transmission, one of them wasn't like the other girls. It wasn't a movie, and it wasn't a remake, and it wasn't a brand new game either. Rather, it was an interactive TV show called Silent Hill Ascension. And being the first of these to actually release marked the beginning of a new era for the Silent Hill franchise. Third time's the charm, right? What we saw in the trailer looked just okay, I guess. It was kind of hard to understand what it really was that early on, and I feel that compared to announcements like Silent Hill F and the then highly anticipated Silent Hill 2 remake, Ascension was the weakest link of the announcements made at that transmission. It was sandwiched between much more interesting reveals, but in fairness, that's not really Ascension's fault. And overall, I could at least see what Konami was trying to do. The franchise is coming back with a bang, and they wanted a good spread, so that's why it was getting games, movies, and a TV show, reaching as many demographics as possible. It began airing on Halloween night in October 2023, and the reception was mixed, to put it lightly. So let me ask you this, when you think of watching a TV show, you'd naturally gravitate towards Netflix, Prime, Disney+, Shudder. Well, Silent Hill Ascension was on none of those. Instead, you had to use a dedicated app and website to watch it, immediately alienating the target demographic of TV watchers. Once you were watching, it operated much like a Twitch stream, where there was a live chat in the corner, a bunch of shit all around the screen, and stickers flying up every few seconds, which naturally enough made it very hard to focus on the actual episode. It made for a really awful viewing experience. I mean, there you had an elderly lady dying of an awful sickness, and meanwhile Rosie Knifestab in the corner is talking about being impregnated by Pyramid Head. No, it was awful though. People were filling the chat with self-promo, there were no spam filters, and there was clearly no moderation happening whatsoever because you could get away with typing slurs, but the words Hideo Kojima were banned in the Ascension chat. Some jokes write themselves. So, there are 21 episodes of Ascension. Some episodes are an hour long, some are only 30 minutes. But in total, there is roughly 11 hours of Ascension footage to get through, and I watched it from start to finish 3 times. Meaning I'm something of a Silent Hill Ascension lore buff. Mainly because there's no competition. But since I am, for better or worse, very intimately acquainted with the plot of this TV show, let me walk you through what actually happens. The show starts with 2 girls, Rachel and Joy, partaking in some kind of ritual. Joy seems very nervous, but Rachel insists that they need to see it through. Somehow, something goes wrong, and they summon a monster instead, which kills Joy without hesitation. And without a second to breathe, suddenly we jump all the way over to Stilledaalen in Norway and meet the Johansen family as they care for their bedridden mother. Ascension follows 2 plots simultaneously that it jumps between throughout every episode. Joy and Rachel are members of a cult in Hope's Junction in Pennsylvania, and of course the Johansens are in Norway. It can be a lot to keep up with, especially with the crazy amount of characters the show throws at you all at once, and while the 2 plotlines do eventually weave together, it takes quite a while before that happens, so, you can already start to see the cracks in the narrative before we even get rolling. Rachel, over on the American side, is obviously super tense after Joy's death. She doesn't fully understand what even went wrong with the ritual and is not looking forward to breaking the news to Joy's brother Toby. Toby has a pretty bad reputation in Hope's Junction. He spends most of his time drinking the day away at the local bar, and life hasn't really been good for him because of what happened at the mill. We don't really know what happened, and no joke, Ascension keeps you in the dark about it for 20 episodes, but whatever it was, Toby seems to be at fault and he hasn't ever been able to move past it. Rachel chickens out of telling Toby herself and instead gets her husband Eric to break the news about his sister's death, and it goes as well as you'd expect. Over on the Norwegian side, we get to know the Johanssons a little bit more. Ingrid is severely ill, and it seems to be causing a massive strain on the entire family. She's constantly hurling abuse at Carl, as well as their daughter Astrid and her son Orson. Are you keeping up with all these names? We've got a lot to get through here today, okay? Carl goes outside and sees an ooky spooky monster in the yard, and then suddenly finds himself in a creepy otherworld area. There's more monsters, we get another chase sequence, and Carl wakes up from the nightmare only to find that Ingrid is dead, leaving us with the burning question: did Carl kill his wife? Does that sound familiar to you at all? Can you maybe name another Silent Hill that involves a dead wife? Toby starts seeing visions and hallucinations of Joy telling him to get revenge on Rachel and the cult for basically letting her die, and Carl breaks the news of Ingrid's death to his grandson Orson with the exact amount of tact you would expect.
She died.
So okay, that was episode 1. Let me give you a breather for a second because there was a lot of names and a lot going on in that episode. And that leads into the first issue I noticed with Ascension. They're throwing out names and words constantly without ever giving you any context or even a chance to digest what's going on. The cult is called the Foundation, that's fair enough, but in the first episode alone they talk about blight and withering like these are things we should already know about. Some characters accuse others of being blighted, but what does that mean? Is that a disease? Are they cursed? Is the withering like a hell world or otherworld akin to earlier Silent Hills, or what? They just say these words, but nothing is given to you visually to really cement these ideas for the viewer, and as a result, you just get really lost in the conversations. You're constantly playing catch-up, like all the characters in the show are in on a secret that you've not been told about. A few chatters during the first episode's airing said they felt like they missed an episode already, and I completely agree. Ascension doesn't establish its concepts well at all. Compare this to the older Silent Hill games. The otherworld happens, and the characters are thrown into it without a choice. We don't technically know what the otherworld is, but we can clearly tell that it's bad and dangerous, and frankly, that's all you really need to know. It's very much a show, don't tell situation. Ascension is the other way round. It is a tell, don't show style of storytelling. In one scene, for example, the Foundation leader Xavier says that the withering will consume the world. How do they know this? Has it happened before? Because if it has, why does it feel like only 5 people care about it? They keep saying that this important Foundation elder called Paul Radcliffe said so, but who is that? Give me something tangible to work with here and stop just telling me about it. But no, forget interesting cinematography, symbolism, or context given in more creative and engaging ways. Ascension just communicates everything verbally, which is why you'll probably notice very quickly how a lot of the scenes in the show are just people yapping. Now imagine watching that for 11 hours. Anyway, in episode 2, Toby decides to retaliate against the Foundation for letting his sister die, quite understandably. What's his master plan, you ask? Throw one Molotov cocktail into a corner and just stand there. Because, you know, standing around after just committing a crime is a foolproof way of getting away with it. The Foundation quickly realize that Toby is becoming a big problem. Eric, who has been friends with Toby for years, tries to talk it out with him, but he just isn't backing down. So they decide to emotionally manipulate the grieving man into joining the Foundation, because they say it'll offer him protection from the withering. Whatever that is. So it was at this point for me that I learned all the members of the Foundation are kind of pieces of shit. It's acknowledged multiple times throughout the show that the Foundation has caused families to split, relationships to be severed, and many people have died at their hand. And yet we are apparently meant to care about these characters? I'm all for flawed protagonists. I love when there are central characters in a story that challenge you or your beliefs. I think Silent Hill Downpour, for example, did this in a very interesting way with Murphy. But when you write these kind of characters, you need to make sure they have a certain humanity or sympathetic element to them. That's exactly what creates the conflict for the viewer. I like this thing about them, but I don't like that thing. Ascension fails at this with Rachel, Eric, and all the Foundation members because it just shows you all the bad of their personalities and none of the good. And in so doing, I was disconnected from any of the scenes involving Foundation members because in my eyes, they were the bad guys, and very one-note bad guys at that. I felt even more justified in this feeling because after Toby is manipulated into joining the cult, they force him to perform a ritual that ends up getting him killed, and as far as the Foundation is concerned, that's that problem solved. Cool. Now, I've not really been talking much about the Norwegian characters because, to be honest, not much is going on over on that side of the world for the first few episodes. The show definitely puts more focus on the Foundation storyline, which is funny because I found it to be the much more generic and uninteresting half of Ascension. The Johanssons meet Detective Haugen, who is handling the mysterious case of Ingrid's death, and she's pretty convinced that Carl killed her. During a discussion between Haugen and the Johanssons, we learn that they're not a very well-liked family in Stilledalen. A lot of people hated Ingrid, and the living family are still suffering from that bad reputation. Meanwhile, Ingrid's sister Mette comes to town as they sort out the funeral arrangements, and Carl wastes absolutely no time at all getting in there with a smooch, so nice to know he moved on from his dead wife super quickly. Jumping in again real quick here to comment on something you have definitely noticed by now. In Ascension, no one emotes at all. The majority of scenes are just talking anyway, but whenever a character gets angry or upset or concerned about something, it is practically never communicated in their face or body language. Nor do they have any unique mannerisms or quirks, you know, those things that humans have. And this is going to sound like such an obvious statement, but the total lack of it really makes you realize just how important physical acting really is. Because the thing is, the voice work is solid enough in Ascension. There are some performances that are on the weaker side, for sure, but the majority of the cast are pretty alright. For example, despite only being in the show for a couple of episodes, Toby's voice actor sold the character pretty well. His anger towards Eric felt genuine, but my goodness is his entire performance betrayed by the character models and their complete lack of emotion in comparison. There is a total disconnect between the voice acting and physical acting, or the rigging, I guess, because it's animated. In the majority of scenes, they just have the characters in their default standing pose, and in terms of facial animations, you might see the occasional furrowed brow or shocked expression, but that's about it, and even then they're not animated great. In fact, the poor animation and rigging really shows itself up when the characters do anything besides standing still.
Fuck you! Olivia, wait! Orson, stop! Don't remember? Bullshit! Tell me now!
Now you're gonna be real quiet and...
I'm sorry, Mommy.
It's okay, baby. You're okay.
I love you.
The rigging of the character models feels very amateur, and I imagine that's exactly why we don't see them move that much. Animating them like real people would arguably make the show look worse. And so because of that, bar a rare handful of exceptions, every scene in the show is just 2 or more people yapping. So little happens visually that I truly believe that watching the show with your eyes, is optional. You could treat it like a podcast and just listen to it, and your experience will be much the same as mine. And I don't need to tell you this, but for a TV show, that is not good. Right, so anyway, things go off the rails in Stilledalen because Astrid's son Orson goes missing. The Johanssons live on a farm in the middle of nowhere, so they naturally assume Orson may have run into the nearby woods and gotten lost or gotten hurt or whatever. However, get this. Over in Hope's Junction, Eric and Rachel's daughter Faith goes missing as well. Pretty spooky. The parents are all obviously distraught. Well, I presume they are because their faces don't show it, but it's at this point that things start to get a little spicy. You see, Krista, one of the higher ranking members of this cult, has her eyes on Eric, a married man. Oh, scandalous. Rachel and Eric's relationship has been struggling anyway. He didn't agree with Rachel being in the cult to begin with, and then the whole Toby thing happened, and yada yada yada. But Krista, she was waiting in the shadows to swoop in and steal Rachel's man. Oh, the drama of it all. So anyway, obviously, a kid missing amongst all this is just a further strain on Eric and Rachel's relationship. Eric is adamant that they should be out there looking for Faith, but Rachel seems to be too wrapped up in her Foundation shenanigans to care about her own missing child. Have you noticed yet that Rachel is an awful fucking person? She'll get worse, don't worry. Eric and Krista, however, start to get really buddy-buddy. In fairness, Krista is actually helping him look for his child, so she's got that one over Rachel anyway.
I thought you hated Rachel.
Doesn't mean I hate you or want to see your daughter hurt. I'm a bitch, Eric, not a monster.
But unfortunately, they're not having much luck finding her. But Krista has an idea. She says to Eric, I know what'll help us find your kid. We need a bang. She suggests the idea of a merging ceremony, where a select few members of the Foundation all go into a room and, And apparently it strengthens the bond of the Foundation, and that'll bring Faith back? I don't know, they didn't actually clarify how this benefits anyone exactly. Eric can't really decide what he should do, and starts to get these weird hallucinations of Rachel telling him how much of a bad lay he is, which is very funny.
While you were home with Faith, I was at the Foundation merging with Xavier and all the others behind your back. Do you know how thrilling it was connecting with people like that? You've never been able to do that for me.
But either way, he decides to go ahead with his state-mandated orgy. Afterwards, with almost comedic timing, Faith shows up with a lady called Nora, so the merging ceremony actually seemed to work. Now, this whole time while Eric was getting his freak on, Rachel resorted to desperate measures to bring Faith back. She performed a forbidden ritual that involved gouging out her own eye. Pretty extreme. Now, I want to park the story here for a second, because I need to tell you something crucial about the structure of Ascension. Now, I'm watching the show in 30 to 40 minute long episodes long after it finished airing, but if you were watching this live, it was a totally different experience. Ascension was technically airing every single day for 6 months. Every day, 2 or 3 new scenes would go live on the Ascension website or app, only about 5 minutes of footage total, give or take. So you could log in, watch a few minutes, and that's your dose of Ascension for the day. I have a whole bunch of issues with this structure that I'll talk a bit more about later, but the reason they did it like this was so that viewers could vote on what happened next using in-game currency called IP. Now, this forbidden ritual that Rachel performed, this was something you could vote on. There were 3 options: either she burns the book and never performs it at all, she sacrifices her own eye, or she takes Eric's eye. The second option is the one that got the most votes, but here's the thing. When they animated the show, they didn't know what people were going to vote on, right? And there were like 10 decisions every single week to vote on, so there was no way that they were going to animate totally different, unique scenes for every possible outcome. Nor would it be feasible to voice act possibly hundreds of different variations depending on the votes. So the result of that is when Rachel gouges out her eye, no one reacts to it at all. She's just sitting there, at the table with all the other Foundation members, with blood dripping down her face and a whole eyeball missing out of her head. And this continues for an entire episode. At one point, a door-to-door salesman comes to her house, she opens the door and talks to him, and he does not react whatsoever.
You're from the Foundation?
Yes, ma'am.
And it was so absurd, and I could not focus on anything that was happening in Rachel's scenes because of how jarring it all was. I don't mind there not being dialogue for all the other decisions, but considering the severity of what Rachel does here, could we maybe not have planned a bit more for this one? Anyway, she does eventually put a bandage on it, but let's take a break from the Foundation and hop over to Stillidalen for a while, yeah? Astrid's elder sister Britt has returned to the family farm. There seems to be a bit of bad blood between Astrid and Britt, but they're able to put their differences aside for the sake of finding Orson. At the same time is when Nils comes onto the scene. Nils is a podcaster and, true to their profession, are an absolute nuisance to all those around them. And there's not even a lot to say about them actually, because they don't really do much in the story. Meanwhile, Carl and Meta's brief fling falls apart once he finds out that Meta was mercy-killing people at the hospital where she worked.
They were all in so much pain. There is so much suffering in this world, Carl. I can't stand it.
This is a plot point that comes out of nowhere, nothing becomes of it, and there is no real consequence whatsoever. He tells her to leave Stilla while she still can, but she just dies instead. So with Meta out of the picture, Carl gets to know a girl in the town called Ava, and they start hanging out a lot. Your missing grandson can wait, it's no pressure, man. Ava seems like a little bit of a lost soul. She doesn't seem to get along with her parents, doesn't seem to have many friends, and is really insistent on Carl teaching her how to shoot a gun for some reason.
I want them dead. I want to kill every last one of them.
I'm sure that's no cause for concern at all, no. Anyway, it takes Carl way too long to notice Ava's violent tendencies, and there ends up being a struggle in the town centre where Ava accidentally shoots Carl.
Astrid.
Ava, where is she?
Ava's been gone for 15 years.
No, she was here. I protected her this time.
She was dead the whole time. She killed a bunch of people in Stilla like 15 years ago, and Carl never fully came to terms with it, so he was seeing visions of her the whole time. And Carl's response to this is to leave Stilla abandon his daughters and his grandson, who's still missing, by the way. And we never see him again in the story, so yeah, fuck that guy. Just as the police start to suspect that Astrid might have killed Orson though, he shows up again. He's fine. Fun little fact about Orson, it was established fairly early on in the show that he got in trouble at school for biting another kid, and he actually bites quite a few people in the show. It's kind of his thing to bite people. Fans of Ascension have nicknamed him Chompers, so that is his only name going forward. This is not up for debate.
That'll be fine.
Ah! Orson!
Astrid.
Orson! Orson, no!
But ever since he returned, he's gotten weirdly violent. Well, more violent than normal anyway. He goes Chompers mode on at least 2 people, and at one point he finds a gun and just starts running around the place with it. Like, he seriously goes off the rails, and naturally enough, this freaks out Astrid and Britt a lot.
I don't care.
Oh my god! Look out!
On the American side, the Withering continues to persist in Hope's Junction, and yes, we still don't technically know what the Withering is, and sadly 13 episodes in, I don't think Ascension plans on telling us either, so I assume it's the show's version of the Otherworld.
Rachel, who are these people?
They're friends. Except for her.
The characters keep getting thrown into this scarier, creepier looking version of the real world, so the Withering is clearly getting worse, so what are they gonna do? Krista suggests that they perform the Ascension ritual. Yes! Name drop, baby! And of course they don't actually tell us what the Ascension ritual does. Bold of you to assume we're meant to understand what's going on. Though they imply that it's effectively moving on to the next life. So wow, that's like a big deal, right? If things are that bad, they're probably gonna have to do the Ascension ritual pretty soon, I imagine. Nuh-uh-uh, we still got another 7 episodes of family drama to work through first. Let's make it quick. So the Foundation start to get antsy that Nora, that lady that showed up with Faith, could be a member of the Heralds. The Heralds are another branch of the Foundation that actually welcome the Withering. They think it's a good thing and want it to happen because it will bring about this powerful entity called the Great Empath. So you know how the 2 kids went missing at the same time? Well, that wasn't just a coincidence. The Heralds kidnapped the kids so that Rachel and Astrid would both feel such intense despair that it would bring about the Withering faster, and it worked, apparently. Now, the Withering is such an underdeveloped concept that you don't really feel all that threatened by this information, really. The show expects you to have the same oh shit reaction that the characters do, but because we've been given so little context and understanding of what the Withering even is, it's hard to feel threatened by it. Combine that with the fact that most of the members of the Foundation are very unlikable and have been incredibly destructive from the first episode. Why would I be cheering these guys on? Everything they did to Toby was so messed up, and you're telling me these are the good guys? Once again, the tell, don't show storytelling of Ascension continues to be its own worst enemy. Nora isn't a member of the Heralds, as it turns out. The reason she came to Hope's Junction is because she got a letter from her brother. Problem is, he passed away in that mysterious steel mill incident all those years ago. It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true. A dead person can't write a letter. Now that she's here, it means we'll finally find out what happened at the steel mill, 19 episodes later. And if you didn't think Rachel and Eric were that bad so far, you're gonna really hate them after this one. Rachel, Eric, and Toby all worked at the steel mill. Things were getting rough and business was bad, so one night, Rachel locked the doors of the steel mill, forcing all the workers to do overtime. That's bad enough, right? And very illegal. Then, Eric messed around with machinery he shouldn't have that led to the furnace exploding, causing a fire and killing everyone at the steel mill. He then gaslit Toby into thinking he was the one who did it, which everyone believed because of his drinking problem, and he had to live with this shame ever since, for a crime he did not commit. Yikes. Thankfully, Eric gets his comeuppance 5 minutes after this, and it was probably the only satisfying moment in this entire show. Anyway, we're basically at the end now. Rachel has a hallucination of Joy that seems to imply that there wasn't a monster at all, and Rachel actually killed Joy with her own 2 hands. And given Rachel's pretty shitty track record, that would add up, yeah. Rachel, Krista, and Faith do the Ascension ritual, so they survive, along with Astrid, Britt, Chompers, Haugen, and this guy. Everyone lives happily ever after. Try come up with one word to sum up Ascension. Don't just say bad, don't just say shit. Come up with something more constructive than that. I am so curious what chat has to say. If you could come up with one word. So that was Ascension, guys. Look, let's not beat around the bush here. Ascension is not good. I like to be optimistic even about the most flawed of art, because I don't think everything needs to be a perfect masterpiece for it to be good and likable. But there are sincerely very few redeeming qualities to Ascension. It's not particularly good as a TV show, and it's definitely not good as a Silent Hill entry. But, that being said, no matter how much you like or dislike something, there is always room for thoughtful critique. For as much negative discourse as there was surrounding Ascension, I didn't see many people thoroughly discuss what it actually did wrong. Like, yeah, we can all see that it's pretty bad, but why? Let's talk critically about what went wrong here. Well, for starters, it's hard to know who the target audience of Ascension even was. It certainly wasn't Silent Hill fans, because it shares a little to no similarities with the games, but I wouldn't even say they were targeting TV show fans either, mainly because it wasn't on any major streaming platforms, like I said. You could only watch Ascension on its dedicated app and website, and by doing this, they already alienated their biggest pool of potential viewers. Why would I watch Ascension when I can throw on Netflix and find hundreds of other shows about monsters and cults? So the website was gutted without warning not too long after the series finale, so technically a lot of this is lost media now, but thankfully I managed to grab some footage before that happened. Kind of UI overload, I know. So like I mentioned earlier, snippets of the show would drop every day and you could catch up on all of that over here. The current decisions for viewers to vote on would display in a little banner down at the bottom here, and the arcane library was where there was a bunch of mini games, which were cool. I never bothered with most of these. They just looked like low-budget phone games, and it felt like sometimes the AI had a mind of its own.
You know, stones? You know, the sound of what the fuck? I didn't even make any moves! What?
The only one I ever really gave any time to was the rhythm minigame. I'm a big fan of rhythm games anyway, and you got to listen to music by Akira Yamaoka, so I wasn't complaining, was I? Unfortunately, it wasn't really a rhythm game though, mainly because there wasn't any rhythm involved. There was no precise timing, there was no keeping to the beat. You just had to press every circle on the screen before it moved on to the next screen. So it was just a button pressing simulator with some nice music in the background. These minigames were quite buggy, too. The phone version of the guitar minigame had this really awful bug where the song and button prompts would end, but the results screen would just never pop up, and you'd have no choice but to restart the entire song over again, or just quit out and give up. Brilliant. Now, Ascension did have a season pass. It cost about €20 and it just gave you more in-game currency and cosmetics and stuff like that. Cosmetics for your avatar, which could get you a cameo in the show if you were lucky. Basically, it was a daily lottery. You could spend the in-game currency on tickets, as many as you can afford, and about 3 or 4 people would be picked out every day, their avatars becoming background characters or minor characters who say a few lines of dialogue. These cameos would stick out like a sore thumb because obviously some of them looked very strange, but they clearly just got the one guy to voice act the vast majority of cameos. You can tell his voice anywhere.
What would you do?
Something he'd understand. Like taking away his toys.
If you're good for it, then pay it. What are the charges against her?
This has to be a safe space. You should find another meeting. You're one of them. The Foundation! You're the reason these monsters are here!
My daughter's here. Please.
It's your fault!
Considering there's so many cameos per episode, you will be hearing him a lot, which gets particularly jarring when there are dozens of people with American accents in Norway. Now that we know what cameos are, this leads me very smoothly into a pretty major critique I have with Ascension. There's probably an argument to be made here that this cameo system is a bit tacky, and I'll leave that for you to decide. My personal issue with it is how it affected the flow of the plot. You could really tell they had to shoehorn cameos into a lot of the scenes. All of the important dialogue would happen between the actual main characters, of course, so any conversation with a cameo felt like padding, like they were just filling out time in the episode. Not only this, but because there are so many cameos in total, over 300 I counted, it makes Ascension feel like it has a needlessly bloated cast of characters. I mean, in fairness, how many shows can you think of that have over 300 characters? As if there weren't enough people between the American and Norwegian plotlines already, you've got another 10 or so randomers that show up every episode too. Compare this to the older games. The cast of each Silent Hill game has generally been quite small, usually only 3 or 4 central characters total. But it meant that the characters you did meet were really well developed, each with their own nuances, motives, and flaws that make them all very human. Silent Hill 3 in particular excels at this. Even more, dialogue between these characters was used so sparingly that when a cutscene happens, it would really grab your attention. After meeting Douglas in the mall, for example, it's a solid 3 hours of gameplay before you then meet Vincent in the Hilltop Center. And because at this point it had been so long since you've seen another human being, this meeting feels all the more important and meaningful. Combined with the very tight writing of these games, it makes you really value these brief encounters with other characters. In short, the interactions can best be summed up as minimal but meaningful, and the games are otherwise very solitary experiences. This is a strength of the Silent Hill series overall, and one that Ascension grossly misunderstands. It goes the other direction entirely, where the entirety of its 11-hour runtime is dialogue, because, you know, the one thing everyone remembers about Silent Hill was all that talking. And the cameos are easily the biggest reason why it's so padded. So many scenes are dedicated to meaningless interactions, and there's no better example of this than Jam Man.
Wait! Don't shoot! Please!
What are you doing out here? You could have been killed.
I'm just foraging for wild berries. I swear. I stumbled on a great patch of rowan berries over here.
Have you seen anything unusual out here?
Now that you mention it, I have seen some strange things out in these woods. You? I've been rooting for berries and other things for several seasons now. I like to make jams. I sell them in town. I could bring you some. Maybe you and your family would like that.
You should keep moving. You're on my property.
Well, I am sorry for that. I guess I'll just be on my way then.
What did this add? This was such a nothing scene. Why does it exist? So much of Ascension's runtime is wasted on pointless dialogue like this, all for the sake of cramming in a few more cameos. But why are there so many cameos? Well, because it was a moneymaker. You could use free in-game currency to try your hand at winning a cameo, but using real-world money to buy more of that currency gave you a way better chance. So it was pretty simple. More cameos, more money. That being said, the existence of this in-game currency prompted some people to call Ascension a scam. And while I think harboring annoyance towards this product is quite understandable, I wouldn't call it a scam. In fairness, there was nothing forcing you to spend money on this show. Non-paying viewers had full access to the daily episodes, you could vote on major decisions, you still got some basic Avatar cosmetics. You didn't have to spend a cent on Ascension if you didn't want to. All you had to give it was your time. But what did feel a little bit shitty was the fact the entire app and website was cleaned out seemingly without warning sometime in summer 2024. And any access you had to avatar customization, the mini-games, the cameo archives, everything disappeared without any kind of notice. Considering that there likely were some people out there that did spend a bit of money on this show, I think a heads up would have been nice that 90% of the website will become inaccessible overnight. But back to the show, what is easily much worse than the cameos is the format of the show itself. I've explained that Ascension released via daily mini episodes during its runtime, and, well, obviously it's not a very cohesive format, is it? Ascension already had a very convoluted plot, and doling it out over the course of 6 months did not help it at all. I watched some of these daily episodes as they dropped, and oftentimes nothing important enough happened on a daily basis to make it memorable. The reason TV shows have been doing the 30-minute and 60-minute episode format for decades now is because it's just enough time to make substantial progress in the narrative without taking hours out of someone's day. When you chop it up into little pieces like Ascension does, it makes it a lot harder to follow. It's so easy to forget small details during the week, and multiple times as I was watching it live, I had to turn to myself and think, wait, why are they doing that again? Oh yeah, back on Monday they said they would... Oh yeah, I forgot about that, yeah. But unfortunately, this problem is not solved in the final compiled edit either. Yeah, watching it in the more traditional hour-long format is better, but because it's a compilation of dozens of snippets, and they didn't bother to edit it to flow more naturally than this, it's constantly fading to black every 2 minutes. Sometimes it fades to black, only to fade back into the same exact two characters who were talking to each other in the last scene. Characters are constantly recapping things that happen all the time, because of course you have to remember all these scenes were written with the knowledge that they would be doled out over a 7-day period.
I think Xavier was right. This is happening because of me. Maybe Xavier was right. Maybe I am somehow responsible for all of this.
But this in turn bloats the script massively, easily pushing what is, at best, 3 hours worth of plot into 11 hours. The unconventional format of Ascension's release is above and beyond its biggest flaw, because it didn't give the actual content of the show a fighting chance. Not that the story and writing would have saved it, mind you. The story of Ascension. Where to begin? Let's start with, in my opinion, the most glaring issue. It very heavily relies on Silent Hill 2 in particular as a basis for its story. It leans on, and oftentimes copies, many of the concepts, themes, and story beats of 2, at one point even using a direct quote.
In my restless dreams, I see their forlorn visages.
Now, I'm not defending their choice to copy Silent Hill 2's homework, but it makes perfect sense why they did. Silent Hill 2 is undoubtedly the most well-known entry in the entire franchise. For those who are unfamiliar, it follows James Sunderland, who one day receives a letter from his dead wife that she's waiting for him in their quote-unquote special place, Silent Hill. When he gets there, he finds the town has twisted into a hellscape unique to him, unearthing some deep-seated trauma and difficult truths about his past. The biggest of all being that his wife Mary didn't die from her sickness, but rather he killed her. There's a lot more to the game than what I'm saying here now, but to simplify it in a sentence, Silent Hill 2 is a story about James's trauma, and a beautifully told story at that, one that is very much deserving of the status many people give it as the best horror game ever made. But it maybe did that trauma plotline a little too well, because it feels like almost every Silent Hill that came out after it wanted to copy that formula. You see, many of the Silent Hills that came out after 2, in particular the Western developed titles, also follow a trauma-themed plotline. Origins explores Travis's traumatic upbringing, Homecoming is just Silent Hill 2 if you replace dead wife or dead brother, and Downpour explores the trauma of Murphy losing a son. Now don't get me wrong, I like a lot of these games despite this, and some of these games did it better than others, but the problem is it felt like they were riding on the coattails of Silent Hill 2's originality and success. It's a shame too, because the idea of a town that changes and shapes itself based on the person who enters it leaves so much room for creativity. Silent Hill 3 does this well, and Silent Hill 4 does this really well, but too often have the devs thereafter fallen back on the good old James Sunderland wife killer special. And even now, over 20 years since James's story was told, Ascension is pulling the same narrative tricks. But even then, it feels like they only had a surface level understanding of 2 at best. They copy the letter, and they copy the dead wife, and they say the restless dreams quote because everyone knows that line. They don't dig deep into any of the more challenging subject matter that 2 explores at all. Whether I like it or not though, that is exactly what Ascension was going for. As the devs said, they took the most inspiration from Silent Hill 2 because it is, in their words, the easiest to grasp. And while they're not wrong, it's a shame that there was a perfect opportunity to do something fresh and new, and that opportunity wasn't taken. Oh well. And yet, ironically enough, for as much as Ascension copies the games that came before it, there is virtually nothing Silent Hill about it whatsoever. The extent of Ascension's horror is someone doing a goofy smile, or maybe the monster designs are kinda creepy, but there is absolutely nothing that will get under your skin. Nothing with the deeply unsettling psychological undertones that Silent Hill is known for. Nor does Ascension's narrative relate to anything that has been established in any of the previous Silent Hill titles. The Foundation has no direct relation to the Order, the cult in the games. None of the gods or entities that are referenced in the games make an appearance here. Ascension takes place in Pennsylvania, whereas the games are set in Maine. The town of Silent Hill never makes an appearance, for God's sake, in a show called Silent Hill Ascension. But the thing is, having a completely new setting and cast of characters isn't the problem here. In the games, each new entry follows a new cast of characters, and some of them don't even take place in Silent Hill at all. The series was always more like an anthology than it was one continuous plot, but one thing that always remained consistent were the vibes. And even games like Homecoming, where 90% of it happens in a place called Shepherd's Glen, still links back narratively to the lore and story established in the earlier titles. Every title in the Silent Hill series serves its purpose in the overarching narrative, whether by a lot or by a little. Except Ascension. And the annoying thing is, there are hints of a cool story here. I really liked the idea that the Johansons are almost like a cursed lineage. There have been so many bad eggs in their family history, and a large chunk of Astrid's story is exploring whether or not she is an inherently evil person because of that. The idea that no matter how good she tries to be, by merit of being a Johansson, she will falter and cause harm to someone else, like her mother and sister did before her. This paranoia of whether or not she is truly a good person affects her relationship with her son Orson and her eventual girlfriend Haugen. What a fresh and original story that could have been, one that is very fitting of the Silent Hill title. Such a shame they do nothing with it. At best, they flirt with the idea, but never commit to it, instead deciding to fill the runtime with petty family bickering and vastly less interesting plot threads. Even with the Foundation, there was potential to go further. Instead of having such a heavy focus on Rachel and Eric, I think a more nuanced approach to the power struggle within cults would have been a far more intriguing narrative. Silent Hill 3, even though it largely focuses on Heather's own struggles, still manages to subtly explore this idea in the background. Claudia and Vincent, 2 high-ranking members of the Order, are both corrupt but in different ways. While Claudia relies on manipulation and murder to force Heather's hand, Vincent is more devious, only helping Heather so that he can continue to live his comfortable, luxurious life as a wealthy priest. In his own words, Claudia succeeding wouldn't be convenient. The final scene between Claudia and Vincent is one of my favourites in the entire franchise, because it showcases their conflicting personal morals as well as the power struggle within the cult as a whole. How even an organisation as cutthroat and dangerous as the Order is collapsing from the inside.
Who do you think you are, claiming to know God's will?
Go home, Vincent.
Home? This church is my home. I built it with my power. The power of money that you view with such scorn. Although I admit that this atrocious scenery is all yours.
If you continue to get in my way,
then you'll kill me.
This clash between the two central villains made for a really subtle but fascinating subplot that is often forgotten and underappreciated. And this is the kind of narrative that I think the Foundation in Ascension could have really benefited from. Again, we see hints of this between Rachel, Krista, and Xavier, but of course it often just boils down to childish bickering between the three. And Ascension never commits to anything more ambitious or complex than that. They just throw a bunch of ideas at the wall to see which of them would stick, but none of them do. Not because they are inherently bad ideas, but because they do nothing with them. But despite everything I've said so far, I do have some positives to say. I know, surprising. There were stickers you could use in the chat box that were honestly pretty cute. I don't have much to say about them aside from I really like the art, and there were some cute franchise nods in there too. Almost kind of makes me wish Ascension just ended up being a comic or something instead, because this artwork has infinitely more character than the TV show did. Also, no matter how much of a mess Ascension was, it gave us the It's Trauma sticker, and look, that is objectively one of the funniest things to come out of this franchise in years. Also, there were people who were still tuning into Ascension until the very end. I caught the final airing of the show, and it does seem like the show garnered a small, dedicated following. I still personally think Ascension is hot garbage, but I'm not so joyless and miserable that I'm going to judge others for liking it. All the power to those people for finding something to enjoy in it. And in fairness, the idea of a Silent Hill TV show is kinda cool, and I can't blame Konami for trying this avenue. The game's already having an anthology format is something that would, on paper, translate very well into a TV show. Think something like Fargo, where each season follows a different set of characters and a different plot, with the town of Silent Hill itself being the only common thread. With the right director and artistic vision, that could work pretty well, I think. Especially since the first movie proves that Silent Hill can translate to the big screen quite well. I don't think it would be impossible for a TV show to achieve the same. Now, do I want them to make a Silent Hill TV show? Not really. But if it were to happen, would I immediately detest the idea? Also no. As for the Ascension we did get, yeah, it's not great, but I could see it maybe working with other IPs or stories. Think something like Telltale's The Walking Dead, but on a more global scale. It's an idea that could work, just never with Silent Hill. The stories that this franchise tends to tell require a tightly written plot, and this is something that a TV show that relies on viewer voting could simply never achieve. But that all being said, I don't think Ascension being a stinker means bad things for the Silent Hill revival. Resident Evil, another survival horror titan, had a pretty shaky period back in the 2010s, but my god, like a phoenix from the ashes, along came Resident Evil 7 and 8 and the remakes, some of the finest horror titles that gaming has ever seen. I remember a time when people said the Resident Evil franchise was dead, and look at it now. If that series can come back swinging like it did, then so can Silent Hill. As of this video, the only other one of the announced titles to release is Silent Hill 2 Remake, and it is a certified banger. I probably won't be making a video on it, maybe down the line, I don't know, but even then, I feel my opinions on it can be summed up with, it's very good, go play it. Challenging, tense combat while not being clunky or awkward, exceptional music and sound design, and beautifully recreated areas, characters, and cutscenes, all while being completely respectful of its source material. I already have 100 hours in it, and it is without a shadow of a doubt the best Silent Hill game we've gotten since the Team Silent era. Maybe most importantly, the remake's success has shown us that Silent Hill's brand of avant-garde psychological horror still very much has a place in modern gaming, and because of that it just makes me all the more eager to see more about the other games that were announced. Silent Hill Townfall is being developed by No Code, whose greatest strengths are their storytelling and atmosphere, a pretty fitting choice for the series, and Silent Hill F, a more Japanese-style take on the series, is being written by Ryukishi07, the creator of the Umineko and Higurashi series, which are some of the best written pieces of media I have ever read in my life. I was ecstatic when I found out he was involved in this project. It is a dream crossover for me. I guess what I'm saying is, to allow this franchise to move forward, we need to let go of the past a little bit. How can Silent Hill ever flourish again if we're constantly expecting another Team Silent game? They were an immensely talented dev team, and I'm eternally grateful for what they gave us, but they also disbanded 20 years ago. While yes, for now, I do think the Team Silent era of 1 to 4 was the series at its finest, that doesn't mean the franchise can never reach those heights again, and I think the remake is a sign of good things to come. I welcome fresh takes on a series I know and love, because I want Silent Hill to thrive, not forever stand in the shadows of games that came out 20 years ago. There are so many promising things on the horizon for this franchise, and as fans, we just need to keep an open mind to it all. Be open to unique, creative, and fresh takes, even if they're unfamiliar and daring and unlike anything the franchise has seen before. Being unfamiliar and daring was exactly what made me fall in love with Silent Hill all those years ago, and I think it's always better for an IP to experiment and try new things, instead of withering and fading away. Except Ascension. Let's not do that again, please. Thanks.